The merchant jolted awake at the creak of a floorboard. His hand shot beneath the pillow, fingers closing around the leather purse heavy with silver pennies. Heart pounding, he listened in the darkness. Just the inn settling, or a thief testing the door. He didn't sleep again that night. He never really slept, not deeply, not when his entire fortune pressed against his skull, when losing it meant losing everything. In medieval Europe, where banks barely existed, and trust was a luxury few could afford, merchants lived in constant fear of theft. So why did they sleep with their money? What other precautions did they take? And what happened when those precautions failed? Before we uncover the paranoid world of medieval merchant security, if you're fascinated by how people protected their wealth without modern banking, hit the subscribe button and give a like. The problem was simple and terrifying. Medieval merchants traveled constantly, carrying goods and coins between cities, across kingdoms, through territories where law barely reached. They needed liquid wealth to purchase inventory, pay tolls, bribe officials, and survive on the road. But carrying money made them targets. Everyone knew merchants had coins. Innkeepers watched them count payment. Fellow travelers saw the weight of their purses. Servants noticed the careful way they guarded certain bags. And in a society where most people lived on the edge of starvation, where a single silver coin represented weeks of peasant wages, the temptation to steal was overwhelming. Theft was rampant. City streets crawled with cut purses who sliced purse strings with hidden knives, disappearing into crowds before victims noticed. Inns harbored thieves who worked with corrupt innkeepers, drugging wine or waiting until guests slept to rob them. Roads between towns were hunting grounds for bandits, desperate men who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose. They ambushed travelers at forest choke points, at river crossings, anywhere a lone merchant might be vulnerable. Murder was common. Dead men told no tales and made no complaints to authorities, so merchants lived knowing their wealth made them prey. Here's where the sleeping arrangements reveal survival strategy. Merchants traveling alone almost never stayed in common sleeping rooms, where multiple strangers shared space. Those rooms were death traps. Someone always waited for you to sleep, watching which bag you guarded most carefully, noting where you placed your valuables. Instead, merchants paid premium rates for private chambers, small rooms with doors that locked from inside. Even then, locks were primitive, easily picked or broken. The door itself offered minimal security. So the merchant created layers of protection. He wedged a chair or chest against the door. He placed his heaviest bags in front of it, so any intruder would make noise moving them. He positioned his bed so he faced the door, able to see anyone entering. And most crucially, he kept his money purse under his pillow, or tied to his body while sleeping. This wasn't comfortable. The purse was hard leather, stuffed with coins that dug into his head or ribs, the strings around his neck or waist cut into skin. But discomfort was nothing compared to waking up penniless, stranded in a foreign city with no way home and no means to restock inventory. The purse itself was engineered for security. Medieval money pouches weren't simple bags. They were complex devices designed to resist theft. The best were made from thick leather, sometimes double-layered, impossible to cut quickly with a knife. They closed with multiple drawstrings that tied in complicated knots, requiring time and light to open properly. Some merchants used purses with hidden inner compartments, false bottoms that concealed their most valuable coins while leaving cheaper copper pieces in the obvious pocket. If robbed, they'd surrender the outer pouch, hoping thieves wouldn't discover the hidden wealth. Other merchants divided their money across multiple smaller purses, worn in different locations. One purse hung visibly at the belt, containing just enough coins for daily expenses. This was the decoy, the one they'd surrender if threatened. The real wealth hid in inner pockets sewn into clothing, in pouches strapped to thighs under hose, or in compartments built into boot heels. Spreading wealth meant losing some but not all if robbed. The cleverest merchants carried most of their fortune in valuable but compact forms, gemstones, small gold objects, or letters of credit that required knowledge to use and were harder to fence than coins. Now the truly ingenious methods emerge. Wealthy merchants traveling with substantial sums sometimes hired armed guards, mercenaries who'd protect them for wages. But guards were expensive and not always trustworthy. Some guards were criminals themselves, waiting for the right moment to kill their employer and take everything. So merchants who could afford guards had to vet them carefully, ideally hiring men with reputations to protect. Former soldiers known in the community who couldn't vanish after betrayal. More commonly, merchants traveled in groups, convoys of traders making the same journey who'd protect each other through numbers. A lone merchant was easy prey. 10 merchants together were a small army. They hired 1 or 2 guards collectively, sharing the cost. They took turns standing watch at night when stopping at inns or camping. They agreed to defend each other if attacked. This system worked but required trust, and trust among competitors was rare. Merchants guarded their trade secrets zealously. Traveling together meant potential rivals learned your routes, your suppliers, your profit margins. So even in convoys, merchants remained paranoid, sharing protection but not information, sleeping with one eye open even among supposed allies. The inns themselves were another battlefield. Medieval inns ranged from legitimate businesses run by honest proprietors to barely disguised robbery operations. The worst inns worked with thieves or employed them directly. The innkeeper served drugged wine at dinner, something strong enough to make guests sleep deeply. Then in the night, accomplices entered rooms with stolen or duplicate keys, robbing unconscious travelers who woke the next morning feeling sick and finding their possessions gone. Complaints were useless. The innkeeper claimed innocence, suggesting the traveler drank too much and was robbed in the street before returning. Local authorities, often bribed or in league with the innkeeper, did nothing. Smart merchants learned to recognize warning signs. An inn too eager to serve wine before showing rooms was suspicious. An innkeeper who asked too many questions about your business or destination was gathering information to sell. A common room filled with rough men who stared too long at your bags meant danger. Experienced travelers developed networks, word-of-mouth recommendations about which inns were safe and which were traps. They paid extra to stay at establishments with good reputations, run by guild members or under church protection, where theft would bring serious consequences. Don't overlook this critical detail. Churches and monasteries offered the safest lodging for traveling merchants. Religious houses were bound by hospitality traditions and couldn't rob guests without severe spiritual and legal repercussions. Merchants carrying valuable cargo often planned routes specifically to stop at monasteries each night, paying donations for rooms and meals. The accommodations were simple, sometimes just a bed in a common dormitory, but the security was real, monks didn't steal, and the religious atmosphere deterred external thieves. Some churches offered another service: secure storage. For a fee, merchants could deposit coins or valuable goods in church treasuries, locked chests kept in crypts or vestries under ecclesiastical protection. The church issued a sealed receipt, and the merchant could retrieve his property when needed by presenting the receipt. This was the closest thing to banking that existed for most of the medieval period, and it worked because stealing from churches brought both earthly punishment and divine damnation. Still, even church storage had limits. Only major churches in large cities offered it. Small village churches lacked secure facilities, and depositing wealth meant trusting priests, who were human and occasionally succumbed to temptation despite their vows. The development of bills of exchange transformed merchant security fundamentally. By the 13th century, Italian banking families had created a system where merchants could deposit coins in one city and receive a letter, essentially a check, that could be redeemed for equivalent value in another city. This meant traveling without carrying actual coins, just a piece of parchment that was worthless to common thieves who couldn't read or use it. The system required trust networks between banking houses, but it worked brilliantly for merchants who could access it. They deposited silver in Venice, traveled to Bruges with just a letter and enough coins for road expenses, then redeemed the letter for local currency upon arrival. If robbed on the road, they lost little. The letter was useless to bandits, and the banking house would issue a replacement once the merchant reached his destination and verified his identity. This system was revolutionary, but it had limitations. Only established merchants with good reputations could use it. The banking families charged fees, sometimes substantial, and the system only worked in major trading cities with participating banks. Rural merchants and those trading in remote areas still carried coins and slept with purses under their pillows because they had no alternative. Class divisions in merchant security were stark. The great merchant princes, men who traded in bulk goods across continents, had resources that small-time traders couldn't imagine. They owned fortified houses in multiple cities, with private guards, armored strong rooms, and connections to powerful nobles who provided protection. When they traveled, they moved with armed retinues that deterred all but the most desperate bandits. They used letters of credit exclusively, carrying minimal cash. Their wealth was so vast and well protected that theft was nearly impossible. At the opposite extreme were petty merchants, peddlers who carried small inventories of needles, ribbons, spices, cheap jewelry, walking from village to village. These merchants were vulnerable to everyone. They slept in fields or barns when they couldn't afford inns. They kept their few coins in pouches tied around their necks, hidden under filthy clothes. They were robbed regularly, beaten, sometimes killed for purses containing a handful of pennies. Their lives were precarious, and many didn't survive long in the trade. Between these extremes were middling merchants, the bulk of commercial traders, who had enough wealth to be targeted, but not enough to afford serious protection. These were the men sleeping with money under pillows, balancing paranoia with practicality, taking calculated risks because their livelihood demanded it. Here's the twist that changes everything. Despite all precautions, many merchants were robbed, and the aftermath reveals medieval justice's brutal reality. A robbed merchant had limited recourse. If attacked on the road, he could report it to the nearest lord's bailiff, but recovery was unlikely. Bandits disappeared into forests or crossed into neighboring territories beyond jurisdiction. Even if caught, most thieves had already spent or hidden the stolen coins. The merchant's wealth was gone. In cities, victims of theft could appeal to guild courts or municipal authorities, but only if they had proof and witnesses. Cut purses who struck in crowds were almost never caught. Inn robberies were he said she said situations where innkeepers lied and bribed officials. The most a merchant might achieve was warning others, spreading word that certain inns or routes were dangerous, building the informal knowledge network that protected future travelers. Some merchants hired thugs to recover stolen goods or exact revenge. This extra-legal justice was common. If official channels failed, you took matters into your own hands, finding the thief through street informants and getting your money back by force or intimidation. This worked sometimes, but it was dangerous and could escalate into cycles of violence that destroyed merchants as surely as the original theft. The psychological toll of constant vigilance wore merchants down. They developed paranoid habits that infected every aspect of life. They trusted no one completely. They checked locks multiple times. They woke at every sound. Some merchants reported nightmares about being robbed, dreaming of reaching under their pillows and finding the purse gone. Others became misers, reluctant to spend even on necessities because every coin leaving their possession felt like theft. The successful merchants were those who managed fear without letting it paralyze them, who took reasonable precautions but still conducted business, who slept with money under their pillows but still slept. The unsuccessful either took too many risks and lost everything to thieves, or took too few risks and lost everything to missed opportunities. Walking this line required psychological strength that not everyone possessed. Women merchants faced additional dangers. Female traders existed, usually widows continuing their husbands' businesses or women in certain trades like textile sales. They employed all the same security measures as men, but with added vulnerability. A woman traveling alone or even with female servants was seen as easier prey. Male bandits assumed women couldn't fight back effectively. Innkeepers and guards sometimes demanded sexual favors in exchange for protection or safe passage. Women merchants who refused faced retaliation, robbery, or worse. Some women dressed as men while traveling, disguising their gender to reduce vulnerability. Others hired male relatives or trusted employees to accompany them, essentially buying male protection. The most successful female merchants partnered with other women, traveling in groups that provided both security and legitimacy. But even with precautions, women merchants paid a higher price in fear and vulnerability for participating in commerce. By the late medieval period, some cities began providing better security infrastructure. Merchant guilds established formal patrol systems, hiring watchmen to guard warehouse districts and main streets at night. Some cities required innkeepers to register guests and report suspicious activity to authorities. Banking houses expanded their letter of credit networks, reducing the need to carry cash. Insurance, primitive but functional, emerged where merchants could pay premiums to cover losses from theft or shipwreck. These developments made commerce safer, but didn't eliminate risk. Thieves adapted, finding new methods. Corruption meant security systems could be bypassed with bribes, and outside major cities, the old dangers persisted. The merchant sleeping in a country inn in 1450 faced the same threats as his grandfather in 1350, a locked door that barely worked, a purse under his pillow, and prayers that he'd wake with his fortune intact. The legacy of medieval merchant paranoia lives in our modern financial anxiety. We no longer sleep with money under pillows, but we obsess over bank security, credit card fraud, and identity theft. The fundamental fear remains that our wealth could vanish, leaving us powerless. Medieval merchants faced that fear every day, tangibly, with coins they could touch and lose. Their precautions, sleeping with purses, hiding money in clothing, traveling in groups, were rational responses to real danger. And their stories remind us that commerce has always required courage, that moving goods and money across distances means accepting risk, and that the merchants who built medieval trade networks were as much warriors as businessmen, fighting daily battles against thieves, corrupt officials, and their own exhaustion. Every morning a merchant woke with his purse still under his pillow was a small victory. Every journey completed without robbery was a triumph, and every fortune built through years of paranoid precaution was earned through more than just shrewd trading. If you enjoy the hidden sides of medieval life, hit subscribe and give this video a like.